Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit about the idea of using things like bodyweight exercises and just other tools that we oftentimes have easy access to for our metabolic conditioning or general physical preparedness. And I know these are complex topics, and these are topics I need to talk about more and more. Some I've always kind of used to some extent, something that I'm doing a lot more of these days. Because I see the value in it and understand it for us to be well-rounded athletes. Just like people see me doing plyometrics and other stuff now, weighted jumps. This is all part of being a well-rounded athlete. It's all part of it. And that's kind of why I laugh. People will joke and say, oh, you're not a well-rounded athlete. Well, I'm working on it. And like with anything else, guys, with anything physical related or training related, you get there by being consistent with these things. Now, when we think of even metabolic conditioning, the best way to look at it is basically just resistance work capacity. Things where you do enough resistance training to get your heart rate up. And in the purest sense, that something that a lot of gym goers might understand would be circuit training. The whole idea of circuit training originally falls under that. The problem becomes when people see something like that as their primary training modality. So what we're generally thinking of with stuff like general physical preparedness is something that has a conditioning component because it raises your heart rate, but is still resistance training. So examples could be supersetting multiple bodyweight exercises to submaximal sets. In other words, if you can do 10 pull-ups and 10 dips, you could superset a bunch of 5 or 6. And realistically, you could do a lot of those in the same day. Thinking, for example, something like Pavel Tausoline's greasing the groove method, right? That's an example to where you just have a chin-up bar or a pull-up bar at home, and every time you go under it, you do pull-ups or chin-ups, right? You just do like half of your max reps at most. You have some people who've taken this to great extremes, like the power lifter and athlete Jamie Lewis. And he's known for his own antics and being borderline insane in many cases. But there's a method to his madness. And the guy trains brutally hard, and he is brutally strong and always has great body composition. So there's certainly a method to his madness. So it's one of the things he does is kind of part of what I'm doing. I'm doing bodyweight exercises as part of my own metabolic conditioning. He does tons and tons of pull-ups. And apparently he got further into doing that. He spent a little bit of time in jail. And he got to where he was doing hundreds every single day. Well, that adds up. Because if you're doing hundreds of pull-ups every day, that turns into thousands every week. Thousands every week. Now, you're talking about a guy who at under 200 pounds has had like a 630 raw squat. He's kind of a powerhouse. But we can come over and talk about work capacity. Now, that may not do everything for your lower body, but if we're just looking at things like our metabolic conditioning like that, what happens if we just do large numbers of these bodyweight exercises? Well, we build our muscular endurance, we build our cardiovascular capacity, it improves our general work capacity, and at a certain threshold, there's a hypertrophic effect. Now, when we talk about things like junk volume, would a lot of this stuff fall under junk volume? Sure. But what does junk volume mean? Junk volume means that we're doing training volume that is so high relative to what we need to grow, assuming we're recovering from it, still in which case it's overtraining if we're not. But assuming that we are recovering from it, junk volume just tends to give us very, very little extra muscle growth. Well, if you're doing a bunch of junk volume for large segments of your body, what happens? You know that you're stimulating maximum muscle growth. You know you're at least going to get bigger. You know, your energy turnover is going to get really high, but the main key is not taking this stuff to failure. We're using oftentimes to elevate heart rate. So if you were to superset multiple ones of these different things, that would work pretty good. I mean, a perfect example, like you could take these barbell step-ups that I'm doing right here. There's a conditioning component to those, right? There's a conditioning component. Someone could hypothetically superset these with a bunch of pull-ups. This is stuff you could do at home. You could probably set up a box at home and have at least some real light dumbbells. And if not dumbbells, you could do these with body weight. What would happen if you would superset these with a couple of body weight exercises? Because these are still a body weight exercise. I'm not talking about a pistol squat because that doesn't work. If you do large amounts of these step-ups, though, combined, say, with your pull-ups, and then did some push-ups because that's all you had, and you did them for pretty high reps and sub-maximal sets and circuits, took short breaks between each set, and you did a lot of these several days a week, what would happen? It would improve your conditioning. And if they're sub-maximal, you're probably going to recover even with large workloads. It might take you a little bit, it might tax you a little bit, but you get pretty jacked. At least it'll help, and it'll contribute to your recovery, some of possibly your weak points, and again, it'll make you a better lifter, a better athlete. It'll fall under GPP. And that's something you see even the West Side guys talk about. Louis Simmons always talked about. Of the Russians put all their athletes on large amounts of GPP. All of their athletes had a big background in GPP. What happened? Then they go into their respective sports and they excel. But they had people growing up under their stuff in the Soviet camps to where they did large amounts of just general physical preparedness. All of this falls under that category. They just got them in really good shape. Then they put them into specialized programs for their sport, and it works. And we could joke about things like CrossFit because it has its issues, but what happens when CrossFitters who build a base decide to go into another sport, a strength sport or something? They usually do pretty good. I have a family member who is peaking for USAPL Nationals right now, who did the same thing, CrossFit for several years, then branched over to powerlifting. Walked in and crushed it. She built a base on general physical preparedness doing CrossFit. So this does work. It does work. And as far as doing this stuff goes, this falls under what a lot of people have noted, that people who have certain manual labor backgrounds, right? Farmers are a perfect example. They could build big work capacities. What happens when these people go into real strength sports? They tend to do really well. It's one thing we see down here in Texas, out in the country. Like you take an area like Texas, we see a lot of really good football players coming from the small towns in Texas. Why do you think that is? Could it be these kids grow up working on farms and ranches? And I've known and watched high school football coaches who take their high school football teams and hire them out to do labor. Right? They go have them do labor or even do work on their ranches. Stacking hay, baling hay, driving fence posts. And when you're taking 80-pound and 60-pound hay bales and throwing hundreds of them onto a trailer and stacking them down the road as they're being made, and stacking hay, it's full body exercises. A big awkward object for hundreds of reps, right? It builds work capacity, builds conditioning, makes you stronger. This carries over to strength, it carries over to recovery. And people need to understand this is one of the cornerstones to being a good athlete. Metabolic conditioning, not what you guys are thinking of jogging, running. We're talking about real stuff. And looking a lot of it from a recovery perspective. You know, this is why sled drags work so well. It's one reason sled drags work so well. But things like these step-ups work pretty good too. I'd rather do them as part of my normal training, but if I ever wanted, I can incorporate those. Weighted carries, farmers walks. And where do we get the farmers walk? Because farmers do them, and it helps them get big jacked forearms and shoulders and cores. Carrying buckets all day. It's where the idea came from. So you can do these things, but a lot of the bodyweight stuff for people who have minimal equipment, you do tons of the bodyweight stuff at home. I mean, with nothing more than a pull-up bar and a way to do some push-ups and something like even a block or a bench to step up on, something that'll hold your weight. You can run those in a superset. And what happens if you build it where you do hundreds of them most days? All right, it's going to build your conditioning, and it's going to have a hypertrophic effect. And if you build your conditioning up with stuff like this, you recover better. You have a higher work capacity. Well, that higher work capacity might not seem to matter much on your max effort type days, but when you go to things like speed days, it sure matters. But also builds a body that recovers faster. Because the better shape we're in, not only the faster do we recover between sets, but the faster that we recover between workouts. Which means we can do more work, more training. So all this extra training here gives us the ability to do more of our direct training. Right? This is part of the key. This is one of the keys to getting phenomenal results in the long term for athletes. But it takes time, and it's something you have to build up gradually over long periods of time. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.